Okay, good morning and welcome everyone to Wednesday morning event series from Innovation Bay. I'm your host as usual, Ian Gardner. I'm a co-founder here at Innovation Bay. I'm also a VC, an investment partner with Gelix Ventures. Also a call out to the rest of the Innovation Bay team. So we got Faden Stow, my co-founder, plus Shan, Claire, Sam, CJ and Alison. We're all working hard to support and connect the startup community across Australia. So thank you everyone for joining us this morning. For those of you not familiar with Innovation Bay, we are the longest running community for founders and investors in Australia. Our mission is to support founders in the journey from idea to IPO and beyond, which we're going to talk about today. We do this through a range of events, programs and content such as this, all designed to enable you to connect, learn and grow. Big thank you to our sponsors. We couldn't do this without them. So thank you AWS, thank you IAG Pharmark Ventures, thank you Macquarie Bank, and thank you KPMG's High Growth Ventures team. You support Innovation Bay and you support the startup ecosystem. So yeah, everyone give them some love and use their services. All right, so let's think about or talk about today. Look, for most founders, you don't wake up and start a business thinking about your exit, or generally you don't. And if you do, then you tend not to have such a successful startup. It's not really about the money. It's about wanting to solve a problem. It's normally personal to you, and you want to do it in a fairly unique and compelling way. However, the lure of a large pay off your mortgage and never need to worry about working again if you don't have to, paycheck is definitely not too far from the back of most founders' heads. So we've called this session Life on the Other Side, but in some ways that's a little bit inaccurate because there really is no other side. Most driven founders can't really stop working even after they've had an exit. Look at Elon Musk. I mean, he had a tremendous early success with PayPal. He kept doubling down, but now he's reinvented multiple industries and he wants to put 1 million humans on Mars. So, that's pretty ambitious. So I wouldn't call that an exit. Anyway, today we've assembled a pretty diverse group of founders who've been through different journeys at different times. Ultimately, they've all sold their startups. And they've got a bunch of experiences to match. So the idea today is really just to have a chat about the notion of an exit and what it actually means for them as founders. All right, let me stop sharing that and jump to our fantastic panel. So normally I'd read a quick bio on them up front, but I'm actually going to make this a little bit different today. And I'm going to use the first question just to set the scene and get them to talk a little bit about their respective backgrounds. So we've got Wendell Keuneman, Olivia Humphrey, who is coming from Perth. So Olivia's 6 a.m. there. So we appreciate you getting up so early for that. And Dean McAvoy all the way from Darlinghurst. Welcome to all of you. It's great to have you on the show. Let me start with Olivia. So, you had a pretty interesting journey with Canopy. It was kind of in the US, but you've sold it and come back here. So why don't you just give us a quick potted background about you, Canopy, and how you ended up back in Perth?
Sure. Well, I started Canopy really for a reason to be my own boss in 2008. I just saw an opportunity for a home business to distribute DVDs to university libraries. It was a 22-step process, and Canopy was this sort of canopy over this laborious process university librarians are going through.
Our DVDs taking us back.
Yes. And then YouTube launched, and I thought this makes far more sense to get films through to professors and students. And so I created a streaming solution. So Canopy morphed into really a Netflix for university libraries where faculties and students could log on and watch 30,000 films. We curated them like thoughtful entertainment, so documentaries, indies, some dry academic films, anything that any student on campus we felt would need to support their studies. And so it was really a B2B2C model whereby the users would watch like they watch Netflix, but the libraries would pay because it's a library resource. And it took a few years until we'd really saturated the Australian market, and I turned my attention to the US market. And we already had a few customers there and there was clearly a demand. So still bootstrapped, I took Canopy to San Francisco to head it up there with 2 bags and a 10-month-old baby. That was in 2013. And it was a really, really tough slog. for a few years, but eventually we got the market share, and I made the decision to expand into public libraries. So anyone with a public library card in a participating library could log on and watch Canopy, and the public libraries pay. So it's really just like Netflix, but instead of putting your credit card in, you put your public library card in. And then in 2018, I sold Canopy to a Californian private equity firm and moved back to Perth, actually December last year. I stayed on as CEO for a couple of years and then recruited a new CEO. And as it turned out, my timing could not have been better. I still feel, terrible for what's happening over in the US and, I guess here as well. But yeah, moved back before COVID was a thing. I think we might have lost Ian. I don't know. Do we want to hand over to Dean to tell your story?
Yeah. We'll just roll with it. So my background was, my family kind of had a hospitality business, owned bars and restaurants. So that was my background, and came up with an idea for an online reservation system. Launched that in 2004, and moved over to Silicon Valley. Lived there for a few years from 2007 to 9, which were not great years, and ultimately pitched a bunch of investors and didn't raise any money, and the business failed. But by accident, we'd kind of A/B tested our way to the group buying model. So we used to run online reservations in the same way that kind of Groupon did. And I pitched an investor, and he tipped me off to it very early on, and came back to Australia broke, moved back in with my parents at 32, and then was like, well, what am I going to do? Eventually convinced, I actually pitched in Innovation Bay. So I went to one of the dinners and pitched them, and we started Spreets in my birthday, February 4th, 2010. And the first day it did $4,000, by September, it was doing $4 million a week, $4 million a month, sorry. And then, so it grew like crazy. We raised $800,000 from some European angels, and it grew like crazy. We then started getting approached by Groupon and Living Social and other people about the company being purchased. And so we thought, maybe rather than being distracted, we'll run a process. And eventually we'd been talking with Yahoo 7 about a commercial arrangement, and just really liked those guys. They were nice people and had a similar sort of vision. So we sold the business technically kind of almost 11 months after we launched in January 2010. January 2011 for $37.5 million. And then, so that was a good year. I wish I could do it every year. Haven't quite worked that out yet. But, and then since then have started another business, which was Icon Park, which was a crowdfunding platform for the hospitality industry. You can see there's a thread of like trying to fix hospitality throughout my career, which it's not fixable. And then I went on and started an industry group, Tech Sydney, a few years after that. So it's been an interesting journey post then. Ian's given up, so we're just gonna roll and do this ourselves. Wendell, over to you, mate.
Thank you. So I think I started life as an engineer, and I did a few gigs straight out of uni, and then did my postgrad at the same time while I was working. And then I think I used to argue with my boss a lot about, philosophical debates, in a really good way. Like, he was a great mentor and things like that at the time. And I just wanted to explore things, right? And so I went out and started a company that was in the telecom space. Originally, it was a services business, to be honest. I think very, very similar reasons to Olivia. I wanted to just kind of do my own thing for a while and see what this was like, and explore and create things, and potentially just even have a great team around me. So that was actually the genesis for doing it. This was focused on we started in 2000, right? So that's the first company. So it was quite a while ago, and it was post.com, and we were doing web technologies and a few different things, but then we kind of rolled into the telecom space and voice over IP. And we looked at a few different opportunities there, and then we really flipped into a product mode. And we raised capital from an angel, and And basically that started the journey around 2002, 2003. At this stage, like as a services business, I was earning a lot of money as a 23-year-old. And so I was just like, hey, this is great. But the flipping modes into product was just a whole different thing. As you know, it's just, you just start getting put under the grind. And so that really evolved very quickly into a product company that was called Carbon 12. We were acquired by a company called Broadsoft in 2005. I set up the Sydney office here in Chatswood, still running today, and moved to the US actually around the same time as you, Dean. So 2007 to 2010, which were great years for learning, not so great years for the financial crisis, but it was really fantastic. Yeah.
And then when you started Carbon 12, it was a learning platform. Like, were you focused on the exit then? Was it in your mind in the beginning, or like what was going through your mind at the beginning?
No, not at all. Like, honestly, it was just a way for me to just start and do something completely new. And so I think for me, it was just a way to actually explore those ideas. And the acquisition really just came from a natural synergy between the two companies, where we were a very big part of their offering, and they were about to IPO. So they acquired us before the IPO, and lo and behold, the global financial crisis hit, and then they stole their IPO as a result. So I moved to the US during that time, and then I kind of just evolved. I got my product management training in the US there, and that was kind of, I formally got that. So
how did you start the conversation with them? So like, did you approach them? What was the first thing that happened?
I presume you've now taken over, Dean, because I was...
There we go. Sorry, man. I had the spreadsheet open. I was like, I'm just going to roll.
Thank God for that. Yeah, I had a spectacular technical disaster there. So I had a full internet crash, then computer crash. So yeah, thanks for taking over.
Dean was doing great.
We're rolling.
I'm irrelevant. Keep going.
I can't ask myself the hard questions though, mate.
Yeah, no, I'm good with that. Anyway, sorry. Wendell, why didn't you jump in and finish that one?
Oh yeah, I was just going to say that it just came naturally because we were rolled out to millions of their seats. So they were a carrier grade solution to the likes of Telstra, Singtel, AT&T were their customers, and we had crossover customers in millions of their seats, and so we became basically a good part of their attach to their seats, and so they needed a set of applications that ran over the top. And I think the learning for them was, while they had an amazing backend, the shift to cloud, the big differentiating factor is the experience and applications that sit on top. And that's kind of what pushed the acquisition.
Yeah. All right. Look, are you okay if I take over again, Dean?
Yeah.
All right. Let me. I'm sorry, I missed some of that, but it's probably quite a good time for a spectacular crash, because I think we just got through the intros in that first question. So I might stick with Olivia and Dean. I mean, part of the reason that we did ask you and not some others, because there's plenty of people that have had exits and bought a McMansion and gone up to live in the Gold Coast, never to be heard of again. But you're still active in the ecosystem. And is that, the question is really, is that an increasing trend? I mean, are you seeing people exit and actually exit, or is there a desire to remain in the ecosystem? So Dean, why don't I start with you and then we'll go to Olivia.
Yeah, I feel like my mission in life is to go through really, really hard stuff and like fall down holes and then make sure no one else falls down them. And that's been my history. I've gone and made all the mistakes everyone's made in the past. And I just don't feel like it's right. Like if you walk past and there's a hole in the ground and you let someone else fall into it, like that just doesn't feel like the right thing to do. And so I'm kind of driven by that to just make sure the people that come behind me, it's not as hard and not as difficult. And that's been why I've been involved with StartMate as a mentor from the beginning and an investor. And that's why I started Tech Sydney. It was about, we need to come together and bring the density of the city together. And that's been successful at that. And that's why I continue to try and, find ways to add value above and beyond that, because we can help this ecosystem grow. If we want a future society that we need right now, right? If we want to make this world a better place, it's going to be created by the entrepreneurs listening to this call. Yeah. And anything I can do to try and help that vision happen, maybe I'll start something myself again, but I'm in Olympic level training. In order to start something, you've got to be Olympic level fit. And I'm not fit yet, so I'm using that time as my best start.
Do you think that's true? Like, is that not going to be a bit scary for a potential founder starting? Because if you think you have to be Olympic level fit to start something, you probably wouldn't do it.
Maybe, but I mean, I wouldn't want to kid someone that the road ahead's going to be easy, because I think if you come into it thinking that it's going to be it's an irrational person that starts a company. If you look at the statistics, you're not going to make money out of it. Right. So anyone who starts it thinking they're going to make money, it's not true. And so it's an irrational person who's intelligent that quits their job that's safe to go and do this. So you've got to be a little bit crazy, self-delusional, and you've got to be driven by something more than money. It's got to be a mission. It's got to be a purpose, which is ironic given I sold my business in a year. But if you see the thread between my life, my family owned bars and restaurants, and I saw how much money my dad wasted on advertising that didn't work. And so my first attempt was Booking Angel. My second attempt was Spreets. My third attempt was Icon Park. And so purpose-driven people perform better in their role because they're driven no matter what happens. I wasn't starting a business to sell it. I was solving my dad's problem of getting business for his pub, which nearly ruined our family. It caused fights at home, and it's a much bigger purpose than that. So I didn't quite answer your question, but
no, I know, and I kind of want to double click on this and jump in, Olivia or Wendell, if you want. But it's if you know what you know after having been a founder, would you do it again? I mean, it's kind of like if the truth of how brutal and hard and lonely and mentally stressful and all the rest of it, like the founder journey is, then a lot of people wouldn't start it. So we don't want to put them off.
Well, it's a really difficult question for me to answer right now, particularly. Ian, but not many people know that after Spreets, I had some challenges. So when I sold the company, I got, you have all your lawyers and advisors telling you what to do. And, I started Icon Park. It was working really well. And then all of a sudden, got this huge tax bill, which was unexpected. And it was way more than I thought, way more than I could afford. And then started a 6-year battle trying to work that out and trying to work out why it happened. And I went into dark places, had to shut Icon Park down, and I got pretty down for a while. I got pretty victimed. And so if you, and I've only just sorted that out at the end of last year. So if I add up that entire experience, I would say no, because, I lost a relationship. I had to lose family. I didn't lose family, sorry, I lost, but it was a very stressful moment in my life. And so, but then, in the last 6 months, I've started working with some founders and some companies, and it's an addiction, right? It's the moment in my life where I felt most connected to my purpose, building something, creating something that meant something in the world. And there's no way that I can not do this. Yeah. So it's a really hard question. I think if you asked me this 6 months ago, I'd say it's definitely not worth it. But again, my purpose is to try and make it better for the people that come behind me. So I want to try and do things so that system that caused all those problems for me doesn't, let's try and make it better. It shouldn't be like that. And I learned something really important in that moment. It is that everything is always your fault. Everything good and bad that happens in your life is always your fault. And it's such a powerful kind of thought, because then everything the bad that happens, you can look at why. You go, what did I do? How did I allow that person in my life? Why did I choose that? And that's a much more empowering thing that I chose to do last year. And then all of a sudden, I looked at this problem I had with curiosity. I was like, here's an opportunity for me and try and negotiate my way out of a really, really difficult situation. And so I hired an FBI hostage negotiator, Chris Voss, who I just sat down and said, here's my problem. How do we fix it? And I got rid of all the lawyers. And I used the technique that Ray Dalio uses. And that is that your your advisors are simply to upskill you. Rather than you outsourcing a decision for someone else, an important decision, you need to get two people of opposing views to debate it in front of you, and you inform yourself and you make the decision. And I learned that really, really, really important lesson. So that, anyone listening, that is what I would advise to do when important decisions you have to make come up. Don't outsource it, upskill yourself.
God, I mean, there's a ton of lessons in there, Dean. So, I mean, that covers off some of the questions I was going to ask you later.
Yeah, I know.
We'll come back to them.
Sorry, mate.
Yes, all right. No, it's like, I think that was super valuable. And thanks for sharing. There's tough stuff in there. So that's, we appreciate that. Olivia, I mean, you moved back to, I want to just make sure we're finishing off on this community question, but you moved back to Perth. That's a unique ecosystem. I mean, it's the most remote city in the planet. It's not close to anything. So yeah, how are you viewing the whole ecosystem thing and giving back?
First, I just wanted to add to your question about would you do it again? Because I think it's a really interesting one, and it's one I struggle with. And a little like Dean, I think it's a journey, and my answer probably changes over time. But having a period of reflection, my thoughts are that the startup journey is just full of extremes, huge highs and huge lows. And so focusing on those lows in those moments, of course, you'd say, this is the worst thing ever. There was one point in my San Francisco journey where I was looking up caravan parks, thinking if everything goes south, we're going to have to move back with my family and live in a caravan. Turns out there's some gorgeous caravan parks on beaches out here. So it didn't sound too bad. But on the other side, these huge highs that I think we often neglect to think as much about because we're so focused on the lows, which are beyond anything that I think I could have ever got with a more sort of linear career through a big corporation. And so balancing that out, the answer probably is yes when I take the highs and the lows. But the other thing is, even with those huge tentpole moments with the business evolution, for example, when Canopy made the New York Times for the first times and our revenue increased 35% overnight, it just was such a high. It was so exciting. But at the same time, some real challenges came with that, with the increased publicity, with the increased awareness of the platform that led to some huge lows. So I feel like that's the journey. And as over the 13 years I ran Canopy, I started realizing the highs I got less of a high on the highs, yet I went less down in the dumps on the lows. And that came with experience. So, yeah.
And in terms of giving back to Perth and the startup community now?
Yeah, so coming back late December, I feel like, two things. In my early 40s, what makes me fulfilled? And you want to still keep being challenged, growing businesses, solving problems. Of course, I'm going to still be very, very active. And the other side is, having learned so much over the 13 years of Canopy, there's so many things I wish I knew back then that I know now. And there's a huge sort of motivation to do another, startup or help others with some of the learnings that I learned the hard way. So back in Perth, I really feel it's a little like Austin, Texas, in that it's isolated enough that Perth's charting its own course in the startup world. There's some incredible startups over here, and I just want to caveat with, I'm still learning. Being back 6 months, but having COVID in between, still learning, but getting very, very involved in their startup ecosystem here, and just absolutely loving that.
Yeah, and it's not without successes. I mean, Canva was started in Perth, so that's they've done all right.
Yeah, there's been some really great startup stories actually coming out of Perth. So.
Yeah, good. Wendell, I wasn't going to ask you this, but I think I will, because it's pretty interesting. And in some ways, you and I share a journey. Like, we had startups, and I didn't want to do it again. You can talk for yourself, but I went into VC because I realized that I like helping a lot of people. Rather than just focusing on one. And also I knew how brutal the journey was. So a little bit like Dean, and maybe to an extent Olivia, it's just, you go into these things with your eyes wide open. And I think I was looking at the venture path. So what about you? Like, you've gone from a founder to VC. So tell us about your thinking.
Yeah, well, it was a tough decision. So when we came back to Australia, so I wanted to actually comment on the whole journey, because when we left the States, we were coming back for family reasons as well. And I actually thought career over, right? Coming back to Australia, because back then, like, like
That's a bit
US
harsh.
was kind of well, no, but at the end, no, you got to think about
yeah, I know.
Right? The time was around like 2010, and US was the mecca, right?
True.
And when we came back, right, and this is an important point, because when we came back, I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna go work for a services company or do something like that, because there was not a lot of product stuff there, right? Or I'll start something myself. But when we came back, I think one of the things I was saying to myself is like, and I got lucky kind of walking into the offices of Atlassian randomly, but that's a story for a beer. But I actually left Atlassian 1 year and then did another startup, right? So out of Melbourne, right, which is called Inference. And so, and then I came back to Atlassian when they got a bit bigger. But the reality was like, outside of Atlassian at the time, like I still felt like the ecosystem was less mature, and I think I was like, I need to be part of that solution, not just say like I got to go leave and go to another country to solve it. So it's not to say that you don't enter another market because it's bigger, but I think part of the reason why I'm doing this is because I didn't get a lot of help 20 years ago. There wasn't a lot of stuff written down for this. I know there's a lot of stuff written down now, but I think to an extent it still requires the sort of insights that only a person, I think to Dean's point, has actually been and trodden that path and actually had those pitfalls and can help educate people and give them the tools to work through the problems themselves, right? At the end of the day, it's their decision, and we always sort of say that with founders. And so my transition to investing was, again, more for either I wanted to start something from scratch, I wanted to give back to the Australian startup ecosystem, and then I kind of wanted to give back in a different way. So I'll talk about that later, but I think the point is the fund is a vehicle to allow me to do that giving back and build something which I think is really necessary for the Australian community, which is seed investment, right? I think all of the funds have kind of grown up, and gotten larger, and I think there's a sort of a space in seed right now where there's a dedicated, so that's kind of where we're focusing, and that's where I think founders need the most help when they're just getting started.
Yeah, again, there's parallels there. I completely agree with you, and that's the area that we're focused on too.
Yeah.
Are you enjoying it? I mean, that's probably a decent question.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my partner laments that I'm not that person that she married that's going to retire on a beach, and I think that both Olivia and Dean were purpose-driven people, and for me, like I think I wanted to go and assist the next generation and build a healthy ecosystem. I think as much as Atlassian has been amazing and will spur, I think, some great opportunities for people coming out and creating either their own startups and a boon for the ecosystem, it's really important that I think folks like us are actually giving back in this way this is how an ecosystem grows, right? So
the combination of money and knowledge is the gold, right?
Yeah.
And you're bringing both, so that's awesome. Has Ian frozen again? How do you stop yourself, Wendell? How do you stop yourself kind of diving into things? So like, how do you resist the urge of like wanting to, like, you're talking to a company and they're doing it and you know how to do it. How do you sort of hold back?
It's really, especially when you know how to do it. I think, look, I've actually gone as with some of our companies, and I've actually gone as deep as going into Figma and starting to design stuff. I haven't gone as deep as writing code. Actually, I have. But I think the point is that that's not my expertise, and it's more just around educating. As I said, I think I try and use a set of tools that help give them a perspective. I think that perspective that you talked about, which I kind of use as, you talked about showing two extremes to make a decision.
Oh yeah,
is a really good example of one of those things I use, that where I think there was a company recently that was looking at, like, should they enter the enterprise segment or SMB, or where should they focus? And we looked at the exploration of what it looks like if you just went all in on SMB and then all in on enterprise. And we looked at those outcomes, and you looked at the concept of like a pre-mortem where you say, what's the worst case scenario? And then they could reconcile, I guess, what the outcomes were. And not that the answer was going down one or the other, they just could see and figure out where the investment was. So that's a good example of
what about you, Olivia? Like Kareem asked a question in the Q&A I saw. How did you deal with like the lows? And how do you keep yourself like not going crazy?
Really hard. And so I'm very open about the fact that I think particularly being young and dealing with the lows, and also sound like Wendell, not having a support network. I bootstrapped, I didn't have a board, I didn't have investors. I really had no one to really fall back on. It was really tough on the mental health, and there was so much pressure. Like I said, so much pressure for dragging my family out to the US, and at times the competition over there was just ferocious and unexpected. And so I had a very, very good therapist. Even finding time to do that was difficult. And often there were times where my family, my husband and my baby at the time, we would go away up to Napa or go away anywhere, camping, whatever, out into the woods, and just reconnect and just realize what is the most important thing, the fundamentals of life, love, friendships, family, all the rest of it doesn't matter. It's just noise, and just constantly reminding ourselves of that. And the other thing was really, for me, I think there were two huge moments. You talk about the difficulty dealing with taxes and these unexpected things. Mine are slightly different scenarios, but two along the journey. And the first one I really didn't deal with at all well. Went to a very dark place. The second one, I realized I've done this before, and I know that this is going to end. It's okay to feel stressed. It's okay to feel anxious, and you know what? It's going to pass. So just one foot in front of the other. I
had the exact same feeling like recently with COVID. And I was like, remember that moment when something really stressful happens, and it first happens and you get this like, oh, what do I do? And then once you've done it and gone through it, you look back and you go, oh, that wasn't that bad.
Yeah.
So now whenever I get that
feeling,
I remind myself and I go, oh, go talk to future Dean and go, he'll tell you it's all right. So just so with all the stuff with COVID, I'm like, oh yeah, it's stressful. Sure. Oh yeah. No one's paying rent there. Yeah, that's fine.
In the I do some entrepreneur in residence work with Curtin University, and when I'm mentoring a lot of founders, often pre-rev, I talk about the importance of separating oneself from the business, because I made that mistake starting up Canopy, where it was one. I was Canopy, Canopy was me. So anything negative that happened to Canopy was my fault. It was negative to me. And having that ability to sort of work on the business, it's, and I still now think of that. Canopy is this fabulous story that I had I was fortunate enough to be able to work on this journey, and it was over there. And now I'm looking for my next story to work on. I think that really, really helped, because you're able to.
Such a good point, because founders who can't separate themselves from their business can never take feedback, because all of a sudden someone saying that they don't like this feature means they don't like them, and it just crushes you. So you've got to, that is such a good insight for everyone listening. You've got to separate yourself from your business. And
actually, that point around the hats is super important. Also I think you talked, Ian, about the exits piece as well. I think, there's a couple, like there's your role in the business, there's your role potentially as a board member if you have a board structure in place. And then I think the only conversation with exits is actually better to put a hat on as an investor as well. Because I think you need to look at your business objectively when you're thinking about an acquisition or an IPO or whatever it is, and having that lens actually gives you some objectivity around value as well.
To be able to say what's wrong with my business.
Yeah.
And look at it objectively and be like, this is shit. Like, we've got to fix this. But if you're tied up in ego, you can't really do it. It's so true. Ian, you want to roll back in?
Yeah, look, hey, I don't know what's going on with I've got some gremlins in my computer today. That's twice. So like there's no guarantee that won't happen again. So
right.
Part of the reason we picked such a great panelist or panel, because they can take over. They don't actually need me. They've got the run sheet. So thank you, Dean. Where do we get to? Like,
we're talking about actually how you dealt with mental stress, and
Yes.
then Olivia brought up a great point about how you've got to separate yourself from your company in order to feel good. And then we were talking about how you need to do that objectively in order to get feedback and look at it like an investor.
Yeah.
I do have just an additional point, and I'm curious about Dean and Wendell that I marked down here, is I often talk to founders and there does seem to be a fixation on the exit. How can I build, what decisions can I make now for this point in the future that may or may not happen, which I think, we're talking before, that's not the most sensible way to start a business. It's unlikely to have the exit. But to get an exit, I think we all feel incredibly fortunate, and it opens up a lot of doors. For me personally, it takes away the anxiety that I have, that I never wanted to rely on anybody else for to live. The government, boss, whatever it might be, I don't need to rely on that, and that's just something that I will never take for granted. But one of the amazing investors that came into my life in the US said to me, when we go through this exit, nothing's really going to change. It's just money in the bank. And it sounds really trivial, but I'm curious of Dean and Wendell that there is this sort of glamour aspect of having a significant exit where you never have to work again if you don't want to. But the reality is that it truly doesn't make you happy. And in fact, I've seen a lot of founders have huge exits, and it's had the adverse effect where, relationships, friendships are challenged. The way people look at them is different. And I just thought that was potentially worthwhile touching on, just to remove this glamorous idea of what an exit is, although, at the same time, it does open doors and solve other problems.
Wendell, you want to jump in on that, Dean?
Yes. I was going to just tell a story that I actually, this is, I think maybe Atlassian version 1, or before I came back the second time. I had a chat to Mike, and he was telling me, it was really interesting because I was talking about potentially leaving, and doing this startup in between. And he said, people only have like 1 or 2 really amazing ideas in a lifetime, and sometimes you just got to really hold on to it. And I found that conversation really useful because and profound, because it's really true. I think that as much as you think about an exit, I think you look back, and hopefully the experience has made you grow, or given you so many more things back in your life as much. And I know that there are times of hardship and downs, but it can be some of the most exciting times in your life, right? It is certainly a roller coaster of emotion. I'm certainly more a therapist for many founders these days, but I think it can also be some of the greatest times in your life. And so I think, as much as you think about an exit, I think being part of that and holding on to that is super important. So I just want to add that.
Yeah, I think I made the decision always with what would help me achieve my purpose better. And so do we raise money? Yes, that will help us achieve the purpose better. And then when we were growing so fast and we knew competition was coming, we were like, how do we align ourselves with the right resources and people to make sure that we can win? And so the decision to sell was actually more around that. And I agree. I mean, I look back at those times as some of the greatest, but then I started my next company, which is Icon Park, and I only took maybe a year off, 7 months or so, 8 months, maybe a year. And I was straight back into it. And so I look back at those times when I'm building and growing a company and I know I can do it again. And I actually got better at it. So, like the first month of Spreets, we did about 40 grand. The first month of Icon Park, we did about 300 grand. And then, I mean, technically we did Tech Sydney, we did 500 grand in the first month. So I'm getting better at kind of working out how to engineer product market fit before you actually launch. And so I've kind of accidentally kind of found a new purpose just by following what I'm good at. And that is kind of helping founders, do the research before they start, to go and get the insights that are important to go and build that business. So I think you can get to product market fit's like a game of pin the tail on the donkey, you know, but most people just kind of start randomly and then hope to A/B test their way to the tail. And that's product market fit. Whereas I think you can do a hell of a lot of work, asking the right questions, researching, to deliver the right insights to build the right product for the right time.
Yeah.
And helping founders do that is what I'm at now. And that's sort of mentoring, but it's also investing as well. So I'll invest money and time in companies, and I love it. It's basically like, instead of starting one company, I'm starting 5.
Yeah. All right, look, we're down to the last sort of 20 minutes or so. So let's maybe take some questions from the audience. So these might be a little more tactical. So here's one from David Walsh, who was teasing me in the chat, I'm sure, earlier. So thanks, Dave. Who are the best people to have on your board? Other founders or experienced board members? Wendell.
I think it's a mix, and I think it's contextual. So we often look at board structure as a very strategic thing. So we look at what the company needs. We try and get some experience, obviously, in terms of directorship, but it's really around what you need for that company and that stage of growth. And I think a healthy board is one that actually also knows when they need to step off as much as get back on, or so restructuring the board at different cycles in your journey is also relevant, right? Because your journey should change and evolve, and the people you have on the board should do the same.
Yeah, I mean, because boards, I mean, I said we're probably going to do a whole topic on boards, because, you know, when you're tiny, they're not so relevant, but as you get bigger, they become more important and more relevant. And certainly, I think for all of you, as you headed towards this exit, you would have had a board. So again, it's, you know, this is probably a relevant question here, and I think comments are quite appropriate. Let's ask another question here. I might throw this to Dean, and maybe get Olivia's input as well. So, but we're seeing secondary sales coming. So, you know, last round of safety culture, you know, they raised $60 million and all went towards secondaries. And you're seeing this with other big successful startups. So secondary is when someone else comes in. It's not an IPO, but it's liquidity for early investors or staff members. So the implication here is that you're going to see non-founders, you know, so either those early staff members who, in theory, could be able to talk about life on the other side with a partial exit. Is this good? I mean, any thoughts on this one, Dean?
Yeah, I think it's a great thing, because when there's a company that's executing well on their mission and their purpose, and there's people who've been there since the beginning or in early days and have given up a lot, right? Sometimes they sacrifice salary and in return for equity, and you know, they're starting to, you know, get tired of working the long hours for, you know, maybe a lower salary, or it just gives them a little pressure relief. You know, they can pay off the mortgage, they can go on. And so basically your goal as an investor or as a board member is to align the incentives well. So you never want a founder or a founding team worried about money or having to have difficult conversations with their significant partners, because you know, then they're not focused on the business. And so that allows the companies, you know, the people to go and, like, you know, enjoy life a little bit. But it's not enough to kind of go and like live forever, so it doesn't take their foot off the gas completely. And getting that balance right is super important for a company that's going to last for 10, 20 years. Safety culture, Canva, they've all done the same thing.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important for those really mission-driven, super successful companies.
Yeah. All right, let's keep rolling. Olivia, I might ask you a different question, and it's come in from Karim Saran.
I think I might have asked that one.
You did ask someone the post-exit, hand over the reins?
Oh, no, sorry.
It's a different one. Yeah, so it's just coming in the chat. So, I'll just read it out. Was it difficult for you, Olivia, to hand over the reins post-exit to the new CEO at Canopy? And how did their leadership style differ from yours? Similarly, how can Canopy ensure going forward that it will still remain innovative now that ownership and control has moved from the founder to private equity? So that's a good question.
A really great question. And yes, it was hard. I spent a year looking for a CEO and found a very good CEO. Ultimately, by that stage of the business evolution, it wasn't my choice, but I had two shortlisted. And the new, it's not so new anymore, coming up for a year, is fantastic, but to your point, very, very different. And we had a 3-month transition, and luckily, because I was leading the CEO search process, I was very involved with the transition, and we had a lot of fun in that transition. But it became very clear that the new CEO wanted to take the company in a new direction, which was part of the reason that that I hired him. The company was also at a very interesting point. It'd gone through a huge growth stage. It was sort of starting to transition into that next more established stage, so it sort of had to change anyway. But with the CEO, my definition I thought, what would a successful transition look like? And for me, it was if the entire executive team stayed on and willingly, and that's happened. There has not been one turnover, I don't think, pretty much in the whole company that's not just natural. And with the executive team, everybody's still there and very, very motivated. It's a very different style of leadership, but it's one they've all just adapted to. And I think part of that was I was very transparent from the minute the CEO search started. All of the executive team were involved in the interviewing process. We all talked about the direction the company was going to go when I moved back to Australia, and who would be the best to lead it. So yeah, it is changing. I think it has to, though. And in order to stay innovative, the team's still there. I would like to think it's going to continue to stay innovative, but I just don't know.
Yeah, no, look, it's a tricky one. It always is. Again, let's keep rolling. Wendell, I might throw one to you just around earnouts. I mean, the reality is an exit is never often an exit. I mean, if it's an acquirer, they want to kind of lock the founder in and drive value from them in case there's Anyway, let me, rather than preamble it too long, do earnouts work? Wendell?
Yeah, look, to me, I think you can look at it a few different ways. For me, like during the first one, which was effectively an earnout, I looked at it as a transfer of risk. So when you think about like the risk that you're running in a startup, this is kind of where investor hat on. You're kind of transferring risk into another vehicle, right, or a less risky vehicle. And so when we were acquired by Broadsoft, I think at that point they were well on the way to an IPO. And I think I was young at the time. So for me, it was just all new learnings, right? And it was a net addition. So you got to look at how the company does M&A and integrations. And because we were a net new capability to the company, I had my own space to roam in the company. They kind of gave me a new wing to run. And it was, I think, yes, is the short answer. They work. There's tremendous upside because I think I got another bump, at the IPO stage. And I think there's definitely, they do work. I just think you need to be mindful of what you're walking into as part of the acquisition, for example.
Yeah, because I mean, there's often it's one of the strong negotiating points. How long and how tight should the earnout be, and how, what percentage of the cash is on the immediately on the table and linked to the earnout. And I don't think there's a right answer to that, is there?
No, I mean, like normally they can either sign you up for a standard sort of employee piece, like the 1-year cliff and the 3-year earnout, or there can be an accelerated earnout period. I've seen, I think generally it's about 2 years where you can kind of earn out the whole amount. But I think it really is around your penchant for like doing either another thing straight after that and getting out. For me, I was quite happy to stay because I was just kind of learning this whole new thing, going to the US. So I think you need to figure out what your journey is and where you see yourself, and sort of gauge it on that and negotiate those terms if you have an opportunity to do so, based on that. So.
And I think I probably should ask you this because I think you're the only one of the three that has done this, but you moved from founder to an employee. In some ways I did a similar one, so I've got my own experience with this, but I'm really interested in your perception on it. So what was that like for you, going from founder to, with all the freedom and joy that comes with that, to being told what to do?
I think sense of autonomy at times can be hampered, but I think it's a mindset thing. I think if you operate as, I don't really like these terms, but I think entrepreneurs or whatever you want to call it, but basically operating like an entrepreneur in a company, I think you can kind of have a mindset of freedom around that. But you look, I think the problem is just the burden of bureaucracy sometimes in a company that you might sort of hit. And it's not to say that you might not actually develop those things in your own company, right, over time. So you're just sitting at the top. And so you may not see it as much or feel it as much. So I think the only thing I'd say is Atlassian was one of the only companies that actually had to dust off the CV for, I hadn't updated my CV in about 10, 15 years. Right. And so it was just, so it was kind of going into that company. It was a leap of faith. And, but I think the blessing there was they just operated very much as letting people run. Right. A lot of high performance in there. And I think they just let people run for the most part. So I think I didn't have maybe some of the restrictions or the shackles that people normally feel in some corporate life. So I think I was just fortunate.
All right, let's keep rolling. So Brian Williams has asked a question. What would you do if you started your business again today differently to improve scale? Olivia, let me ask you that one.
Easy for me. I don't know if I would do it, but I would seriously consider funding. Like when I started out, I often say, I didn't even call Canopy a startup. It was a home business. Right. And I went down to the local library and got How to Start a Business for Dummies. That is how I wrote the business plan. And so it was a 13-year adventure. I'm not sure I would have been able to do it any differently, but I sometimes get a little overwhelmed talking to founders these days about how sophisticated the startup ecosystem is, and how from the onset everyone's looking at funding and looking at that landscape and working out how, even from very early stage business plan, the different raises, the series A, B, C. And that was something I never had to deal with. I think there's an advantage in that I could just grow as a CEO with the company at my own pace. And the company was always profitable because I didn't have a choice, so I never had to raise. And that's huge advantages and huge, now I know what I know, time savings. I just focused on growing the business. But it also came with the challenges I referred to before, without the support, without having anybody to help me. I had to make my own mistakes to learn. That's different. That's a different conversation. Yeah. Probably seriously consider getting some support, financial and probably professional.
I wouldn't mind just jumping on the scale.
Sure. Yeah.
I think I see a lot of founders who start a company in an area where they've lived and breathed the problem so well for so many years, and then all of a sudden they raise a seed round or maybe heading towards Series A, and they stall a little bit. And it's normally because the founder's either leading product or sales. And what happens is when you scale, you need to bring other people in to start to fulfill these roles, so you can or maybe you stay in one of the roles, but you need to start to bring other people in. And there's a real problem when you try and bring a product manager in who doesn't understand the problem as viscerally as you do. And when you can't break down the problem into first principles, and when you can't build a muscle in the company about going out and talking to customers and building insights from people and building product based on those insights, you really find it difficult to scale product and sales. And so I'd say one thing you can do early on is start to build the muscle in your company about how you build the insights that you build products on. And it's about how you go and talk to customers, distill those insights out and turn them into product features or marketing value propositions. And I'd say that is the one thing that founders don't do well enough in the early days. And normally they can get away with it because they know the problem so viscerally themselves.
Yeah. All right, look, we've probably got time for one last question. We've probably only got 2 minutes or so. So I'm going to ask all of you this question. So if you can keep your answer fairly brief, even though it's a relatively complicated and important one. So, and it's from Karim Sarhan. And it's around the running themes of the highs and lows and dealing with sort of mental health challenges. I mean, it's a recurring theme, as we always hear about in startups, and it just doesn't go away. And like Dean, you've already talked on this, so I might get you to test this one first. But how do you deal now with the highs and lows to stay focused and stable? Exercise, therapy, mindfulness, any tips? So yeah, each of you just fairly quickly, please. Dean.
Yeah, first one is I've had a bunch of good mates that I've always had from the beginning, and just them being able to call you out and keep you grounded is really important. Secondly, all of the things mentioned above. So I've got into meditation. I exercise regularly. That's super important. I try and eat healthy, but I also, don't mind to blow some steam off occasionally and have a few beers. So they'd be some things. And then I have got a regular therapist I check in with every month, and it's a bit of a stigma thing, and particularly as a man, and particularly as a in Australia to go and get help. And it's not help because you've got a problem. It's actually optimization. So having a coach that actually can talk you through your thoughts and your way of thinking and your approaches to life, because most of the reasons why companies screw up is actually psychological issues that are going on in the founder that cause them to feel insecure, and if you can't deal with those issues, it's going to ruin your company. So the earlier you can get to understand the things that make you think the way you do will make you a better founder. So do it.
Olivia, any thoughts on this one?
That's a good, solid answer. I will say something as well. When I was in San Francisco, you're constantly bombarded with raises and success stories and all these really great inspirational stories. And I ended up signing up to a feed from TechCrunch about the disaster stories, the companies that had gone under, the companies that had to close for whatever reason or had unexpected consequences. And for me, that was really helpful just to keep things real, because in those dark times, and you read about companies that had to shut down, and there are a lot of them, I'm like, I'm still here. I am still here. I'm still paying my staff. I'm still going to work. It's still running. That is, if that's the benchmark, that's a great day. And so I think that's sort of to keep it real. I mean, it's an amazing thing to start up a company. It's an amazing thing to hire people and motivate and build something, especially from nothing. And that alone should be enough to get, well, for me at least, to get me walking in that door every day.
Yeah. Wendell, last word.
I think that it's important to get, like the scale question, get a counsel, get people in your network to kind of who contextually understand your business and the problems that you're going through yourself as a person, but also build time that gives you space, right? And do things that make you happy, right? That are outside of work. So I just go for walks in nature. That's just connecting. I think Olivia said connecting that's one. And then I just pick up a hobby, right? Like I'm learning to play adult piano now, and I suck, but it's just it brings me happiness, and it's completely departure from what I'm doing now. And so I think it's really important to do that.
Is there a difference between adult piano and non-adult piano?
Yeah, they call it adult piano because there's all these wannabe pianists who are adults who are trying to learn when they didn't learn as a kid. So
even X-rated piano kind of thing.
All right, look, that was terrific. Look, thank you, Olivia, Wendell, Dean. Really appreciate your insights, and and thanks also, Dean, for taking over as moderator when my computer crapped itself a couple of times.
Anytime.
Let me just jump to the wrap up. We are talking to this panel next week, so we're actually moving to a new platform. So maybe it was Zoom. Let me blame Zoom for my technical woes, but we're going to use a platform called Hopin, which we used for an event a couple of weeks ago. It's really cool. I think you'll all enjoy it. Anyway, so and it does involve some virtual networking afterwards, which is really slick and efficient. So I know you've all been missing that. I know Ash is on the call, so thanks for pushing us on that one, Ash. But we have a solution. So next week we've got 3 founders and an amazing investor. So we've got James Kuda, who's an incredible business from Tasmania. He doesn't speak often. Savage. Noel Smith from Adelaide with TeamGauge, Lachlan Donald, BuildKite, which is an amazing business, and Matt Allen, who is a big champion of this stuff. So he's from Pick and Shovel, used to work with me in the AWS team. We had a great guest this week on the podcast. So Christo Carman is the CEO and founder at TransferWise, $5 billion fintech Goliath out of London. Really lovely guy, living in Estonia at the moment, where he's from. Great story and great insights as well. Just a terrific episode. So check that one out. Thanks again to our national sponsors, Macquarie, KPMG, AWS, and IAG Pharmark. And yeah, thank you to everyone for joining us. I will not do much of a wrap up because we're 9:01. Olivia, it's your son's birthday, so you better go and unwrap the Lego. Thanks everyone for joining. Thank you, panel, and we'll see you next week.
See you guys.